What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with the box office breakdown for Sunday, March 8th, where the theme of the weekend is Nothing Lasts Forever. Thanks to Pixar's Hoppers, Disney ended their lengthy military campaign and hostility toward original movies and enjoyed a nice win with a $46 million opening, the biggest opening weekend for an original animated movie geared toward kids since Coco back in 2017, nearly a decade ago. But the more interesting news is that Warner Brothers officially ended their hot streak. Previously, they had released 9 movies in a row, which opened at number 1. But with Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride, they officially have a flop on their hands. It opened in 3rd place with $7 million, placing it behind Scream 7, which had already suffered a calamitous 74% drop in its second weekend. Now, I'm much more interested in the discussion of The Bride, but real quick, let me say this about Disney original movies, Pixar, and Hoppers. Now, as entertaining as it might be to make fun of Disney for their aversion to original movies, wondering who might have held a gun to the studio's head and demanded that they actually make an original animated movie. But if you look at the early days of Pixar, it was predominantly original movies. Not always, but predominantly. And oftentimes these movies were so successful that they would launch their own franchises. They would launch their own IP. Because if you look at 1995, we had Toy Story, followed by A Bug's Life. Sequel territory in 99 with Toy Story 2, but then we had Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up. I mean, basically for the first 15 years of the studio, it was almost all original animated movies, and that's what turned Pixar into that incredibly dominant brand back in the day. And obviously creating beloved animated movies that appeal to all ages is much easier said than done, but it is possible, and we hear so much these days about people basically acquiring studios just to get access to their IP, like Disney acquired Fox, and right now Paramount's in the process of absorbing Warner Brothers, and oftentimes they're spending 60, 70, 80, sometimes $110 billion to get their hands on IP, and I always want to say, just take a fraction of that money and invest it in screenwriters and novelists that might help you create the new franchises and the new IP of the future. It's not like once upon a time, suddenly like there was like a certain list of IP that was created and we can only play in those sandboxes until the end of time. At a certain point, a desperate writer, probably struggling to pay their rent, put pen to paper and came up with an original idea which eventually launched an entertainment empire. And I just wish that there were some executives and producers working for these big studios who would say, all right, for every $100 million that we invest in recognizable IP, we in turn have to invest $1 million in novelists and screenwriters as like an idea factory, creating the IP and the franchises of the future. Because Hoppers is proof that it can be done, that even at Disney, where 9 out of 10 movies that they make are an extension of something that was successful in the past, but if you want to build the franchises of the future, every once in a while, you have to take a chance on something that is unrecognizable, and then every once in a while, you'll end up making something like Finding Nemo, where an entire generation of kids will watch it 10,000 fucking times. All right, but let's switch gears now to The Bride, written and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, starring future Oscar winner Jessie Buckley, as well as previous Oscar winner Christian Bale. This movie opened to $7 million in North America, and abroad, the story's not much prettier. It is limping to $6.3 million overseas for a worldwide launch of $13 million. Now, a lot of people are saying this movie only had a budget of $80 million, and it did have a budget of $80 million when they first shot it. Then Warner Brothers demanded reshoots, so the budget started to creep up to $92 million. And if you believe the experts over at Deadline, specifically Anthony D'Alessandro, he's been saying that it's a $90 million movie, but he says that other people around town have been screaming at him all week. The number is secretly above $100 million, which I suspected when Warner Brothers was saying, oh, it's only a $92 million movie. It's like, sounds very specific. I suspect that between the actual physical budget and the actual marketing cost, we're probably looking at a total spend of roughly $150 million. Meaning that with the roughly 50-50 split between the studio and theaters, that Warner Brothers is probably going to end up taking a very large bath in this movie, losing tens of millions of dollars, no matter how popular it might end up being with digital sales. And anytime there's a new movie out there, which I did not like, which completely and totally falls on its face, the temptation is to gloat, rub their nose in it, point your finger, etc. and so forth. I'm going to try to exercise a little bit more maturity today and have a calm, cool, kind of rational, objective conversation about what are the factors that drove The Bride to such an embarrassing failure. And so here are some of the factors that I've cooked up, and feel free to agree or disagree or to supplement those factors down below, because anytime a movie's a crazy success or a crazy failure, everybody always likes to pretend as if they have all the answers as to why. But I feel like these are some of the main contributing factors. So first, let's do a creative exercise when it comes to pitching a movie. First, imagine this pitch. an R-rated punk rock reimagining of Frankenstein's monster and the bride, going on a Bonnie and Clyde rampage through 1930s America. That sounds like a pretty cool movie. Now try this. A feminist reimagining of Frankenstein's monster and the bride, going on a Bonnie and Clyde rampage through 1930s America. I only changed that pitch by 1 or 2 words, but one of those movies I think sounds like a lot of fun and could be very exciting and could be a big smash hit like Joker back in 2019. The other is a big giant flop. And I think it's yet another example of confusing the small audience for the big audience and the big audience for the small audience. There definitely is an audience for Maggie Gyllenhaal's take on this material. But I think that movie should have been made for like $9 million, shot like down and dirty, guerrilla style with a very small crew, with a handful of actors. Go out in the woods and make your crazy, feminist diatribe, and you'll probably end up having a successful movie and get a chance to make more movies. But imagine if they'd made my first pitch and leaned into a hardcore R-rated genre film with a heavy emphasis on horror. We might be having a very different conversation. And you could still have your strong female character of the bride that feminists would identify with. And this is not the first time a filmmaker has kind of gotten lost in the woods, confusing applicability versus allegory. And with applicability, you make an incredibly strong story where people can interpret it a variety of ways, but they can find different meanings within it, they can identify with it, but you basically make the strongest story that you possibly can with incredible emotion and incredible style, and then you let the audience take it from there. But when you make allegory or propaganda or basically like a shrieking feminist screed, well, then you immediately tell everybody precisely what that movie's about, narrowing your audience down to an audience of basically $7 million in box office in its opening weekend. And I've seen a lot of writers out there, specifically Anthony D'Alessandro over at Deadline, saying, oh, well, making period horror films is really hard. Not really. Like Hammer horror in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, nearly every single horror film they made was a period horror movie. Or we saw Nosferatu a couple of years ago. That was a period horror movie. I think the reality is The Bride's not a horror movie at all. At no point in that entire movie do they try to be scary. They've got a very different agenda in mind. And no one can claim that people were unfamiliar with the IP. There's probably no more recognizable IP within the quote-unquote horror genre than Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a novel that's been around for 200 years, and people have been making movies of Frankenstein for a very, very long time. And there's something about horror fans where they're immune to the passage of time. Like you never hear a horror fan saying, oh, I'm not going to watch that movie, it's too old. I'm not going to watch Alien because it's too old. I'm not going to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre because it's too old. And people still watch The Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein, directed by James Whale back in the day. There's probably no more iconic, recognizable figure within the horror genre than The Bride of Frankenstein with that crazy hair. So everybody out there knows about these characters. I mean, we just saw a pretty good adaptation of Frankenstein do really well on Netflix only a few months ago, courtesy of the great Guillermo del Toro. So it's proof that period horror can work, but obviously that was a much more kind of traditional, faithful adaptation of the source material, or at least a faithful adaptation through the lens of GDT. And speaking of Netflix, before the project found a home at Warner Brothers, at one time the project was pitched to Netflix, but Netflix turned them down because they found the project to be prohibitively expensive. Holy moly, I imagine Warner Brothers right now is experiencing a little bit of buyer's remorse, especially because Warner Brothers is in the process of being absorbed by Paramount Skydance. And usually when that happens, everybody's jobs are on the line, and everybody's track record is looked at very closely. And while Pam Abdi and Mike DeLuca enjoyed this incredible hot streak in 2025 of, once again, 9 number one movies in a row, this is a what have you done for me lately business. And it also doesn't help that Maggie Gyllenhaal has made a lot of public quotes about how, thank you, Pamela Abdi, for understanding me and what I was trying to do with my movie. If I were Pam Abdi, I'd be like, keep my name out of your mouth because my job is on the line now that Warner Brothers is finding a new home. But getting back to the factors that made the movie a failure, I think one of the biggest ones is a C+ Cinema Score, because Cinema Score is incredibly honest. They basically poll people as they come out of the theater. What did you think? And like, oh my God, thumbs down, thumbs up, D, F, A, whatever, but you're getting an immediate, unbridled, very raw reaction. And once again, they're not writing a review. They're not creating a video for YouTube. They don't have to worry about anybody kind of like observing what they said or what they think, and you're just getting that immediate gut reaction. I think that's more valuable than anything, and it just shows how people did not enjoy the movie. As they came out of the theater, like, oh my God, that movie fucking sucked. And people who think that way are not likely to tell their friends and family members and loved ones to go see it. But I was also really surprised by just how many critics that were out there who were willing to underline the movie's many flaws. And over the last couple of days since I posted my review, I've been kind of sneaking around on Rotten Tomatoes and YouTube and checking out a couple of different reviews just to see what other people are thinking. I try to avoid reviews before I do my own review because it's very easy to start stealing people's phrasing if you see their review before you post your own. But there were a lot of writers and a lot of commentators out there who called attention to the fact that the entire movie just feels a little bit amateur and immature, almost like it was written by somebody in high school or middle school, where they've got these impulses and these things that they want to say, but they don't have the talent or the experience or the ability to pull it off. And one of my favorite reviews I found over on Deep Focus Lens, and she's just about to hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, so give her a subscribe and help get her over the edge. But she was talking about some of the feminist ideology at play in the movie, and she said the movie felt reductive. I was like, ooh, that's a good word, reductive. I'm going to have to steal that for my future reviews. I'm actually very glad I did not see her review before I did my own, because I totally would have stolen that idea. But if a filmmaker is trying to bang a very specific drum within their movie, where pretty much every male character on display within the story either ignores women entirely and pretends like they don't exist, or spends all their time just trying to rape them outright, if that is the approach you're going to take, well, then you better bring your A game as a writer and write a really compelling, complex, fascinating story where you can possibly persuade people to come over to your point of view. Because what the final irony with this movie is, and I learned this from Anthony D'Alessandro over on Deadline, he was doing a demographic breakdown by gender and race, etc. and so forth. But The Bride drew 53% guys, 47% women. But when it came to diversity demos, it was 51% Caucasian, 26% Latino and Hispanic, 10% Black, 9% Asian. So if somebody falls into the category that supported this movie in greatest numbers, I suspect a small percentage were your classic kind of self-flagellating males that really responded to Maggie Gyllenhaal's propaganda, and imagine the rest were like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, this movie fucking sucks. And that's the category that I fell into. But in all seriousness, I think the number one factor contributing to this movie's failure is that very few actors can transition to being a successful writer-director, just like there are very few writer-directors who can transition to being successful actors. It's a very short list of people who can juggle all those balls simultaneously. And Maggie Gyllenhaal should not have been the sole writer on this movie. They should have brought in like a real industry pro, like a novelist she respects or a screenwriter she really admires. And even if they were going to be paid kind of off the books and uncredited, just help her kind of give shape to her ideas so that she can do the best job that she possibly can as a director. Because I imagine she had a ton of fun on the set with Jessie Buckley, cooking up all these wild dance numbers and that sort of thing. Also, speaking of dance numbers, Warner Brothers, if you're listening, stop putting dance numbers in movies that don't need dance numbers. Like Je Folie à Deux, a superhero movie, failed. Now you've got The Bride, ostensibly a gothic romance horror movie, which also is failing due to too many goddamn dance numbers. If you want to do dance numbers, make a musical. I will watch musicals all day, no problem whatsoever. But stop inserting dance numbers into movies and genres that do not ask for them. But getting back to this idea of writer-directors and/or actors, and trying to make the switch one way or the other, I think one of the main reasons actors struggle to make the jump to writer-directors is that they look at stories in a completely different light. Like, it's not uncommon for an actor when they look at a screenplay to flip through, find all the scenes where their name is mentioned, and just read those scenes and ignore everything else. And when an actor makes the transition to being a writer-director, oftentimes they think, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if we have a scene of nothing but like 10 minutes of improvisation, which sounds fun for them, but for the audience, we're like, ugh. It's why you get so many horrible, lengthy, just like nonsensical, narratively incoherent scenes in this movie as we do, because clearly Jessie Buckley and Maggie Gyllenhaal were just, having fun. But it's one of those things, have all your fun in rehearsals, and then when it's time to shoot, then it's time to have a little bit of discipline when it comes to your storytelling. But the flip side is that sometimes writers can have similar blind spots where they don't understand the acting process. There's a great anecdote about the making of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Quentin Tarantino and Leonardo DiCaprio were discussing an upcoming scene, and Tarantino was giving Leo this lengthy spiel about the history of his character leading up to that point, and like the history of the Western genre and film and television, just going on and on and on and on. And after he basically had offered his rant to Leo, Leo stopped him and said, all right, but how do you want me to play the scene? I was like, wow. Because I appreciate good writing, and I can appreciate Quentin Tarantino's dedication to this imaginary history that he constructed for all these characters. But in the end, the actor just wants to know, how am I going to play this scene? And I thought that was a perfect illustration of the contrast between the writer's temperament and the actor's temperament. And I think Leonardo DiCaprio very wisely has never tried to make the jump to being a writer-director. And my favorite examples of actors who have successfully made the jump to writer-director, or vice versa, are probably John Cassavetes and Orson Welles, who famously would act in a lot of movies in order to raise money for their own independent productions. And if then you get the best of both worlds. You get to be a successful actor, But you also get to have your vanity projects, some of which turn out to be great movies, some of which do not. But and all the commentary surrounding The Bride, I keep seeing people talking about Maggie Gyllenhaal as an auteur, and technically auteur just means author, but it goes back to the auteur theory of the 1950s, where people started basically thinking of filmmakers in the same way they would like the author of a book. But now it seems like the industry just wants to call anybody an auteur if they're not making movies based like on the Transformers. But it's like, you know what? The Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's Monster, this is IP. You don't get to call yourself an auteur, or you don't get to call them an auteur just because they have an unusual approach to the material. Like these people in this cup, these are auteurs. Wells, Peckinpah, Kurosawa, Hawks, and Scorsese. People with enormous bodies of work where through dozens of movies they established themselves as an auteur. And also, when a filmmaker's only made 2 movies, I'm sorry, it's way too early to call them a fucking auteur. In any case, at the beginning of the video, I said that I was going to be calm, cool, objective, and rational when it came to my breakdown of The Bride. And I think I've pretty much failed on all fronts, so maybe it's time to move on from The Bride. You get the gist. I didn't like the movie. I think the reasons for its failure are many, and its failure is all the more clear when you compare it to Scream 7, which in its second weekend had a 74% drop and still managed to be more popular. And Scream 7 is just kind of a by-the-numbers, generic slasher movie. And I've seen a lot of people complaining online, like, how come people are supporting this totally bland, generic movie? It's not even as good as the first movie. Like welcome to real life. Good movies don't always succeed, and bad movies don't always fail. And market forces are market forces, and they almost kind of operate totally independently from the merits or lack thereof of any given movie. But Scream 7 is well on its way to crossing the 100 million mark domestically, and it's probably going to end up crossing 200 million total worldwide, which is not bad at all for a movie which cost $45 million to make. And I'm sure Warner Brothers is looking at the success of Scream 7 and thinking, damn, like how long will it take us to get yet another Final Destination movie into the theater? Because once again, Warner Brothers is going to have a new boss, one way or another, and the memory of 2025 and that incredible track record of all those #1 movies in a row, some of which were original, some of which were franchises, but people in Hollywood have incredibly short memories. Once again, it's a what have you done for me lately industry, and Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi, while they're coming off an unprecedented successful run running a studio, if we get to like the middle of the summer and they haven't been able to replicate that success again, people are going to start to forget. And that'll be right around the time where David Ellison starts to exercise control over the studio. But I think at this point, it's time to hear from the experts. Let's head over to Variety, where Rebecca Rubin has us covered with an article titled Box Office. The Bride bombs with $7 million opening weekend. Pixar's Hoppers scores $46 million debut. This Bride might need life support. Director Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride, a feminist reimagining of The Bride of Frankenstein, has collapsed in its box office debut with $7.3 million from 3,304 North American theaters. Since the Warner Brothers film cost $90 million to produce, a staggering price tag for the horror genre, and audience scores are downright scary, it's shaping up to be the year's first big bomb. Ticket sales were drastically behind the studio's projections of $16 million to $18 million, as well as rivals and independent tracking services, which offered a more conservative estimate of $10 million to $15 million. Reviews weren't great, 59% on Rotten Tomatoes, but the death knell for The Bride looks to be the C+ grade on CinemaScore exit polls. It doesn't bode well for the word of mouth that's needed for a long life in theaters. Making matters worse, The Bride is struggling to show a pulse at the international box office with $6.3 million, bringing its global tally to a tragic $13.6 million. And let me pause for my first interruption. In that unpopular movies tend to suffer anywhere from like a 60 to 80% drop in their second weekend, there's a chance that the final box office total for The Bride might be well below $50 million. And that'll make it one of the most ignominious, embarrassing box office failures of 2026. But back to the article. The Bride is Gyllenhaal's second directorial effort, following 2021's indie drama The Lost Daughter. A deranged love story, the 1930s set film follows a very lonely Frankenstein's monster, Christian Bale, who recruits a mad scientist, Annette Bening, to create a companion. Jessie Buckley plays the undead love interest for him. The Bride is expected to lose tens of millions, snapping a winning streak for Warner Brothers after hits like Sinners, Weapons, and Wuthering Heights. In an increasingly risk-averse business like ours, we believe the business is better served with studios taking bold swings on originals like this one. Warner Brothers said in a note to press while acknowledging the studio's 9 prior films that opened at #1. Even the 1927 Yankees had 44 losses that season. And let me pause to push back on that Warner Brothers spokesperson. If you want to take a bold swing budget accordingly. Like, look at last summer's Weapons. That movie had a budget of like $35 million, and it ended up making hundreds of millions. So the bold swing was rewarded, but also it's an execution-based industry. If you make a terrible movie, you can't say, oh, well, we took a big swing. It's like, nobody gives a shit if you took a big risk if the movie fucking sucks. So it's like, at the time to examine all this is in the screenplay stage. So many movies these days have reshoots and extended photography and that sort of thing. You know what's really inexpensive to do? Rewriting screenplays, where you have a piece of paper and either a typewriter or a computer or a pen or whatever. That is the time to iron out your details, then shoot the movie. But so many studios now, they kind of go out into the jungle and start making their movie and are like, oh my God, this movie sucks. We got to do extended photography. But in any case, back to the article. This weekend's other newcomer, Pixar's kid-friendly Hoppers, a very different kind of creature feature, captured the #1 spot with a strong $46 million from 4,000 theaters. The film earned another $42 million overseas for a worldwide haul of $88 million. With stellar reviews and an enthusiastic audience reception, a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, and A grade on CinemaScore, Hoppers is primed to be Pixar's first original hit in nearly a decade. The animation empire's last unmitigated win was 2017's musical fantasy Coco, which opened to $50 million and eventually earned $210 million domestically and $823 million worldwide. Since then, family audiences have turned out in force for animated sequels like Pixar's Inside Out 2, which grossed $1.69 billion in 2024, and Zootopia 2, which has racked up $1.86 billion since Thanksgiving, as well as adaptations of well-known properties. Universal's The Super Mario Bros. Movie earned $1.3 billion in 2023. At the same time, original fare has been a tougher sell. Pixar's most recent attempt, 2025's Elio, fizzled with $154 million against a $150 million budget. Studios and exhibitors have been encouraged, though, because PG films have been enjoying remarkable staying power. Zootopia 2 ranked among the top 10 on box office charts for 14 weekends, while Sony's animal-centric Goat has withstood minimal drops since opening in February. When Disney and Pixar have a picture that delivers, they set it up for the long run, says David A. Gross, who runs the movie consulting firm Franchise Entertainment Research. It gives positive word of mouth to circulate. Families and groups have a chance to plan a visit, and kids return for repeat viewing. With spring holidays rolling out over the next few weeks, this should be a good run. Hoppers cost $150 million to produce, which is Pixar's version of economizing. Since the animation studio's films are made in the U.S. rather than overseas, they tend to be more expensive than rivals and used to regularly carry budgets of around $200 million. Directed by Daniel Chong, Hoppers follows an animal lover named Mabel, whose mind is transferred into a lifelike robotic beaver to communicate with fellow creatures and save their habitat from destruction. This is a fantastic original film from the incredible team at Pixar, and it's wonderful to see audiences coming out with their friends and families to enjoy it together, says Alan Bergman, co-chairman Disney Entertainment. Congratulations to our director Daniel Chong, our producer Nicole Paradise Grendel, and our talented cast, along with Pete Docter, Jim Morris, and everyone at Pixar on a tremendous launch. Elsewhere at the box office, Scream 7 suffered a brutal 74% decline in its sophomore outing and still managed to place higher than The Bride on weekend charts. Paramount's slasher sequel slid to second place with $17.3 million from 3,540 theaters. Despite mixed reviews, the film has generated a killer $93.3 million domestically and $149.4 million globally. It's on track to outpace the original 1996 Scream and 1997 sequel Scream 2, which earned $173 million and $172 million respectively, as the highest grossing installment in the long-running franchise. Part of the appeal has been Neve Campbell's heroic return as Sidney Prescott. She sat out the prior entry due to a salary dispute, as well as the enduring popularity of the horror genre. And just to wrap things up, Goat ranked at number 4 with $6.6 million in its fourth weekend of release, bringing its domestic tally to $83.8 million. The film has earned $62.5 million internationally and $146 million globally against an $80 million budget. Like Pixar's Elemental and Universal's The Wild Robot and Migration before it, Goat has managed to stick around on the big screen for weeks after its modest debut. Wuthering Heights rounded out the top 5 with $3.8 million in its fourth frame. Director Emerald Fennell's literary adaptation has generated $78 million in North America to date. The R-rated film has been far bigger at the international box office, with $134.9 million overseas for a global tally of $213 million. It cost $80 million. And here's my theory when it comes to Wuthering Heights. I think a lot of people chose to stay home when they heard the mixed response or the mixed reviews for Wuthering Heights. However, sitting on your sofa late at night, I imagine a lot of people are going to say, you know what? I do want to see Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi get it on. I suspect that when it's available on digital, it's going to be an absolute barn burner for a long time. Even if the sex is kind of tepid and tame by my standards, there are going to be people just love old-fashioned romances with a lot of heavy petting and seat wetting, as they say. So I think Wuthering Heights will basically break even in theaters, and then it's going to make an absolute, just like a treasure trove of riches once it's available online. But looking ahead of this week, what do we got? There's the early access screening that's available for everybody for Project Hail Mary starting Friday. And I actually read the novel, so I'm looking forward to checking that out. And I'm also going to be doing a 50th anniversary review of Robin and Marian, directed by Richard Lester, starring Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn. I'm looking forward to doing that as well. And if an interesting news topic comes along, I'll definitely jump on it and do my best to cover anything interesting that's going on. But I hope that we're starting to see the beginnings of kind of the spring/summer movie season starting to heat up.
I'm not an astronaut.
If you don't go, you die. We're the rest of us.
If Chris Lord, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, if they delivered, we might be looking at one of the first really, really fun movies of the year. Because so far in 2026, I've struggled to find any new movie that I'm really excited about. And I've been watching some old shows and reading some old books and playing some old video games. My life is full of interesting entertainment options, but I do like seeing good new movies on the screen. And here we are, we're nearly a quarter of the way through 2026, and I've not yet seen one new movie that I can put on my top 10 list. So yeah, I'm still looking for my first entry on my top 10 list for 2026. So if you've got any ideas on the front, definitely let me know. But let me know what you think down in the comments below about the factors that contributed to the bride's poor performance. Hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, becoming a member, all that good stuff. You know the drill when it comes to YouTube. But I hope everybody has an amazing week. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.